So I guess we'll start. How are you tonight?
I'm good. How about you?
Oh, real good. I wish it would stop raining. But this is March weather where it's cold and wet and then warm.
I know. It's hard because you're always antsy to get out there, I'm sure. And then once it's there, you kind of forget the rainy days anyway. So.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to repeat what I had said about eggs and things. The key here is because when you inspect the hive, you really need to pay attention to these things. The egg, if it's in the center of the cell, that's brand new, it's less than 1 day old, and that means there's a queen somewhere. So you got to be careful not to kill her, of course. Day 3, they're laying on their side and they're becoming larvae. More than one egg in a cell, could indicate that they're queenless. A new queen can do that once, twice, 3 times, maybe, until she gets a feel for what she's doing. But very, very rare that happens. This is a deep frame, which is the big box frames of 3,500 cells on a side. Looks like a lot, all right, but if a queen lays 3,000 eggs a day, pretty soon she runs out of space really quick. And in the heat of the season, in May, June, early July, she'll be laying at her maximum capacity with eggs. And that's when the blooms also. So the foragers are bringing back honey, she's laying eggs, and that's what leads to swarming. It's a space issue. When you pull a frame out and you're looking at it, you'll be looking at this frame. You'll see the larvae. They should be pearly white, never yellow or brown. They should be moist, and they should be covered with a white translucent substance. That's good. And there shouldn't be a smell to them. And the pupa, that's when the cell gets covered with the wax and closes it, the pupa grows. So it's an egg for 3 days, it's larva for 6 days, and then it's pupa for 12 days. If you happen to see pupa that's uncovered, which they will do if they think it's diseased or if they think there's mites in it, they will uncover and try to pull the pupa out. You can sort of tell how old that pupa is by the eye color. Early pupa is white, later pupa is brown to dark brown. Midway is purple. So white, early pupa, purple, midlife for pupa, and then dark brown is just before it emerges. Here's some larvae. You'll notice how full the cell is. And these nurse bees are putting food in there. Those larvae will, when they capsulate, when they wax over the top, when they enclose it, they will eat all that larva, all that food very quickly. Now this is another picture of larva, and you'll notice there's a problem here with this larva. You notice this larva right here in the middle is twisted and sideways, and there's one here that's sort of yellow and sideways. That's a brood disease. In this case, it's European foul brood, and it looks like a stomach ache, right? The larva isn't laying on its side and curled; it's twisted in its cell, and that's and that's not a good sign. Here's another picture you can see. Hopefully it's good on your side. The picture of the larva, white crystal with pollen right here.
If you would start to see the twisted larva, is there something you can do, or?
Yeah, if it's European foul brood, there's a treatment you can give. American foul brood, you burn the hive, but we'll get to that later. Plus, if it's not extensive, it will correct itself. So bees will correct it. So if you see one twisted larva, not a big problem. But if you see a bunch of them, then you know that frame has problems. Hi, Angela. Are you in yet?
Yep. Sorry, I'm late. Hi.
Oh, no problem. I'm just going over some of the things we already talked about larva, pupa, eggs.
Sure.
So here is nurse bees. You can see the pollen here. It's sort of yellow color. You can see the larva next to it, and that's all good larva. It's white. Key is you want white larva, moist white larva. Okay. So for cap brood, it should be dry. It should be textured. It should be fairly solid brood pattern. There will be spots where they have pulled what they think are diseased pupa out, or they're chasing a worm or something, and they'll pull the caps off and try to get the worm that's in there from moths. So you want 80% of the comb to be covered and capped. If it gets to be 50%, then you know you have a problem with your queen because she isn't laying good patterns. The ratio that you want to remember when you're looking at your frames is eggs are 1, larvae is 2, and cap brood is 4. What that means is for every egg, you'll have 2 larvae, and you'll have 4 cap brood. So that's because of the days involved, 3, 6, and 12. The key there is if you see a whole frame of eggs, you know that this queen is working really hard, and you're going to have a whole bunch of larvae and a whole bunch of cap brood, and you're going to have a space problem eventually. That's just a nice texture of cap brood. And then, of course, there's a bee with pollen on there, and its pollen sac. This cap wax over the pupa sometimes gets a lot darker, which is okay. But if it starts to look greasy, then you probably have a disease in there. So here's the darker cap brood, and that's fine. Up on top is the honey. I show you a lot of pictures because if you haven't been working with bees, when you start pulling these frames out, at first you're going to be mystified as to what you're looking at. Bee population demographics are the key to colony survival. Just because you have a ton of bees and they're all over the place doesn't mean it's a good hive, because the beehive works as an organism, as a colony, and you have to have the right age groups working together to make that hive efficient. Enough nurse bees, enough workers cleaning, and enough foragers. So older bees can regress. I've talked about that before, but they're very inefficient. In the summer, you'll have cleaners, you'll have feeders, you'll have guard duty bees, and you'll have foragers. Nurse bees require high protein, foragers require high carbohydrate. Hyperpharyngeal glands are mostly proteins, and that's what the nurse bees, their glands will develop and they'll be able to produce that. There's 2 types of larvae. Worker jelly rather, which is fed for the first 2 days, and then they're switched over to a more protein and honey basis after they've as they're filling that cell. That's different than royal jelly that they make for the queen. Royal jelly is extremely high protein. If you ever get a chance, you'll have these queen cups or queen caps that aren't closed. They're open and they'll be stuffed full of royal jelly. Don't feel bad to take some on your finger and taste it. It's they sell it. It's really expensive, but it's a bit different, a bit bitter, I guess. You got to do that once at least. Adult bees are regulated by pheromones. There's this dance they do to tell other bees, and this is the amazing part. And they tell other bees where the pollen is, where the water is, where whatever it is they're seeking is, and they do this dance. It's called the Waggle Dance. Okay, and this is some experiments that I did a couple of years ago. One of my beehives, I put containers in front of each hive to see how many dead bees they were bringing out and dropping. And like a good hive that's established will lose 400 or 500 bees a day. That's how many will die. So that means the queen has to be replacing them. Plus, if she wants to build a hive, she'll be laying more than that every day. That's where the 3,000 eggs a day or 2,000 eggs a day comes in. All right, these are adult bees. This is, at some point during the season, you're going to open your box and you're going to look in, and this is what you're going to see. And you're going to go, oh my God, what do I do? Because it's really hard to pull those frames out without squishing bees. It looks like it's really a great hive, but you don't know the ages of those. So you really do have to look at a few frames. That's why you start at the outside edge, pull that frame up first, because it's usually just honey. And that gives you more room to move these frames a bit towards the edge and give yourself more room to work with them. And remember, slow and gentle is the secret to working with a hive that looks like this. And this is what a swarm looks like. I think you could see it. It's in one of my apple trees at one time. And you can see the quantity of bees up there that I'm losing. And they probably took 20, 25 pounds of honey with them because they want to establish a new hive, and they'll glut themselves up with honey so that they're not hungry and they don't have to forage, and they can build a new hive. So that's what you're trying to prevent. And they will leave maybe 30 or 40% of the bees back in the hive to take care of the hive they're leaving. So you're going to lose 60% of your bees. The other ones, they will leave with eggs to nurse bees to take care of the larva and to feed the larva and to take care of the new queen when she emerges.
So the adult queen will go with the swarm?
Yes. The queen of the hive will always go with the swarm. In fact, when they're ready to swarm, they put her on a diet and they make her skinny so she can fly. So they intentionally don't feed her. And she can't eat on her own. So you notice the date, end of May. I lost that hive. So how do you make space? One way is to make a split. If you have new hives, you aren't going to do this, but your second year, you certainly will be thinking about it if you don't have enough frames with wax on them, with comb. You take you can take a smaller nook, or you can use an entire brood box. You're going to take a frame or two of honey and pollen and put it on the outside edges. And then you're going to put a couple frames of eggs and larvae and perhaps a frame of capped brood in there. So now you have 5 frames. And then you're going to pull out the frames of brood that you have in your established hive. They will have a lot of nurse bees on them, and you'll shake those bees into the new split you're making. What happens is if there's foragers on there, the foragers will fly back eventually to their old hive. The nurse bees don't know where they are, so what you've done is you've transferred them from hive A to hive B, and they will just stay there and take care of the larvae because they don't know any better. They haven't identified their location in space because they've stayed in the hive for the first couple weeks. You want to look at it let's say every 5-6 days to make sure they're doing okay for a couple weeks and see if, and they should be if you put enough honey and pollen in there. Otherwise, you need to feed them sugar syrup. And you will need a new brood box and a new base. You'll want to close up the front. It's just like a new package. So you want to close up the front and just leave a small opening so that they don't get raided. And you'll want a queen, right? So you either order one, have it delivered. They deliver FedEx or UPS. Or you can buy one locally, like up in Mount Vernon from Ebert Honey. He makes queens up there. And then you'll put the queen, and here you have to make a decision what you do with the old. There's a queen yet, right, in the old hive. Are you going to leave that queen in the old hive, or are you going to move her to the new split? It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I always move my old queen to the new split, and then I get a new queen and I introduce her just like you would introduce a queen to your new package in the established hive. So, and there's different types of splits. You'll hear people talk about a walk-away split. And what that is that you don't worry about the queen. You leave the old queen in the old hive, you move the larva and everything over, and you just walk away and let them work on it, because what they will do is they will make a queen cell. 16 days later, a queen will develop, and eventually, at the end of the summer, that should be a functional hive. Should be. You notice the difference here. If you have a mated queen that you bought and you put in, there's no time to develop a queen. If you have a capped queen cell that you moved over, it's between 1 and 7 days before that queen emerges. And then once they emerge, she has to wait until her chilton, her outside shell, is hard, and she has to go on a mating flight. It's weather dependent. So it could be several days before she gets mated. Then she has to come back. It'll be a couple days before she starts laying eggs. So the key on every split is when will you get foragers and when will they start working that new hive. So a mated queen, you'll get your first field bees in about 40 days. A capped queen cell, say 50 days, another 10 days, which is a long time in the summer because our summers aren't that long, right? There's basically May, June, July, and August. And by mid-August, there isn't much bloom or anything left. So it's really hard for them to develop, to establish a solid hive. And a walk-away split, well, that's like 10 weeks, 11 weeks could be, which is almost the entire summer. So if you were to do a walk away in May, that hive wouldn't be functional and able to take care of itself until perhaps August. My recommendation is if you can, get a mated queen. If you can't, find a frame with capped queen cells and move them over to your new split. as a side note, a lot of people find it really, really interesting to breed queens and as a hobby. And you can do that with cap queen cells. Some people, you can actually take a frame of eggs. They have a tool that you can scoop out the egg with and put it over into a cell that's developed specially to develop queens, and they have these on a long frame. So you might have 30 cells that are specifically designed for a queen, and you're transferring the eggs over there, and then you're making a special box with a lot of nurse bees, and you're producing 30 queens at one time. And then once they get ready to emerge, you got to separate them and put them in their own boxes. It's pretty labor intensive, but some people really enjoy trying to do that. More pictures of larvae. I can't go into enough times that this is what you're going to see when you start inspecting frames. And I'm trying to get you familiar with, you're going to see capped cells, you're going to see larvae, you'll see eggs. I don't see any eggs on this one, but you will sometimes. And there'll be a lot of bees walking around. Another picture of really nice cap brood. Yeah, there's a lot of holes in it, but it's still okay at this point. And you can see they're just capping them down at the bottom. They're still capping a few cells. I don't know if you can tell this from your picture, but over here, you see that these cells right here are a little taller, a little raised, a little rougher than the cells up here. That's because these are drone cells. And a drone cell is bigger than a worker bee cell. Another one. And here, right here in the bottom, you can see what's called a queen cup. It's the start of a queen cell. It's called a queen cup. It doesn't necessarily have anything in it yet, but they will polish it. And then when they get ready, they will put an egg in there. And then they will develop it. And I'll show you some of those develop shortly. So this is cap brood again with honey. You can see the brood area is sort of oval right in the middle. This is a middle frame. Pollen, honey, and down on the bottom here is larva. Okay. So we talked about space. Space is the competition between the queen and the foragers. If they're backfilling, let me see if I can find it. You see these empty cells where they either pulled the pupa out already and they're empty, or perhaps in a few cases the bee has already emerged. If they backfill these holes with honey, that's a clue that they're running out of space. Because typically what would happen is all these cells would have the bees emerge. The house cleaning bees would go in and clean them all back up, and then the queen would lay eggs again in these cells. But if they're backfilled with honey, that means there's no space for honey, so the foragers are using whatever space they can get. Sometimes you cannot prevent backfilling. You can have all the space in the world, and for whatever reason, the foragers think they have to backfill. That's not typically the case, though. All right, a rule of thumb, this is, you need 20% of free space. And free space, there are 3 frames of empty comb, or fairly empty comb, for the queen to lay eggs every week. All right, you're checking it on a weekly basis, or 8 to 10 days. You want to make sure there's 3 frames of empty comb in there. Empty comb is not just foundation, it's actual comb. Now, if you have a group of bees emerging, like in this picture here, like here, but there you see quite a few of them emerging, and they're coming out. You can count that as empty comb because you know they're going to emerge within a day and a half. And this one I wouldn't count as empty comb, but if you look and you see a whole bunch of them emerging, you'll see them sometimes poking their heads out. You go, okay, within a day these will all be empty. So that helps a little bit. Yeah, we talked about, you know, if she's laying 2,000 eggs a day, she's going to consume space really quick. Oh, here's just one of backfilling honey. So here you can see, I hope, the glistening in these empty. What this area here is, these bees have emerged. So see, you can see that they've come out. As they're coming out, the foragers are putting honey right back in. So that means there's a space issue. Mating size does matter for queens. The bigger they are, the wider they are when you're buying queens, the better they are. They carry more eggs. They carry more sperm in their spermatheca. So the bigger the queen, the better. If you have really small queens, breeders will sell them to you, but like guys that have 50 or 100 hives will go and get rid of all their small queens because they know they just aren't great. So the egg laying by a queen is controlled by the space, which you're working on a weekly basis to make sure she has enough space. Again, by the demographics of the hive, she knows whether or not there's enough nurse bees. She doesn't want to lay 3,000 eggs when there's only enough nurse bees to take care of 100. You know, they sense that. Temperature, they got to keep the brood at 95, and then how much nectar and pollen is in that hive. Space is always a competition. So this is a little acronym or memory jogger. Will you raise good bees? So it's white, yellow, red, green, blue. This is for marking. So you want to know what year your queen was, is it marked with a white dot, a yellow dot, red, green, or blue. So for next year, for this year, queens will be marked with a white dot, right? Because it's 21. Next year it would be yellow. 20 and 22 it'll be yellow. So if you look at, you get your queens marked and you look, you can tell if it's 1 year old or 2 years old. It's really easy to blame queens when you have spotty brood or only drone brood, or if the colony is really defensive. My key is about spotty brood could be too many mites. If you get too many mites, you'll get really spotty brood, and it'll look, the cappings will look sick. Mite problems will look like a whole bunch of different disease problems. If you only get drone brood, and I've had this once, where I had a queen, she was accepted, she was big. Apparently she didn't mate right. The hive accepted her. I watched, and she laid frame after frame of just drone brood. And it was in May. So she must have probably ran out over, you know, last year, and the colony still accept her because she gives a pheromone off. And I didn't want to kill her right away because I had to get a replacement. And in May, it's really difficult to get replacement queens. So I had to wait and let her leave drone brood for like 3 weeks. Whoops. If you don't have enough brood, you won't get enough bees. You know, it could be a whole bunch of things. But is there pollen, and is there a pollen bloom, and what's your varroa level? Always come back to mites. So this is for finding the queen. Both of these pictures, remember, the bees will be moving around. They don't stand still for you. So you notice on the left picture here, there's a queen right in the middle. But if you think about them all moving around and moving, it's pretty hard to see her. The right side, the bees will be moving around too, but it's a little easier to find the queen if she's marked. That's the key. It's really easy to kill a queen if she's on a frame and you don't see her and you mishandle the frame. You can squish her, and some queens are pretty mellow, and they'll just walk around and they won't be bothered by sunlight or by movement. And other queens will be like nervous Nellies. They'll get sunlight on them and they'll be moving as fast as they can across frames, trying to get to a dark area. Again, here's a queen that's marked with her retinue, taking care of her. And there she is. She's laying an egg in a cell, and everybody's taking care of her, and that's how they lay eggs. They put their tail down and lay an egg. Water, food. We sort of talked about this. Water, number one. I think I told you about my bird bath example where I'd rinse it out and it would foam up in the middle of summer, and that's because the bees that were out foraging would come back eventually and get water, and they would have pesticide on their feet from wherever they landed in a 3 to 5 mile range. Pesticide, insecticides themselves will go into the wax in the hive. It's recommended on a 3 to 5 year basis that you remove your old wax and put new frames in and let them build new wax up. I don't know many people that do that since it's so expensive. It's just a recommendation. This is about farmers because they can spray their fields. They don't want to have to spray multiple times for different fungicides or herbicides, so they will mix them oftentimes in one mix and then spray their fields. And what that also does, oftentimes it creates a new chemical when they're mixing chemicals. What are the stressors for a hive? Remember, you're doing an inspection, so you start looking for eggs, you're looking for larvae, you're looking for cat brood. Okay, I got a good population. You see the queen or you don't see the queen, but there's an egg, so you go, okay, I got a good queen. You check for water and or for food and pollen and honey. Pollen and honey. Okay, they have enough pollen and honey. Now you're worried about stressors. Big thing is mites and strong hives. If you have a strong hive, they can get through diseases and most things. And here are some of the different diseases. We'll talk about American foul brood, European foul brood. All these viruses down here, or most of them, chronic bee, acute bee, Israeli acute paralysis, cashmere bee, cloudy wing virus, deformed wing virus, Lake Sinai virus, those are all carried by mites. That's how they get into your hive. And nosema, the last one, wherever it went, is basically dysentery. There's two types of it called apis and ceranae. Ceranae is the most popular right now. It's just a gut disease. All right. Remember the spiracles on the side of the bee where they breathe? Those were tracheal mites that were killing them off in the 80s and 90s. They would lay their eggs in those spiracles where the bee breathes, and those eggs would clog up the breathing function, and then the bee would suffocate. I'm skipping over row mites because we'll come back to those. There's something called a small hive beetle and wax moths, two common problems. The small hive beetle, if you don't trap them and get them out of your hive, they will cause enormous damage. What happens is they pupate into a worm, and then eventually, when they become an actual beetle, they will eventually leave the hive and go into the ground outside, and that's where they will actually pupate, and then they come back into the hive as a beetle. They don't like light. They will, they typically are in your upper inner cover. When you pull your inner cover out, you'll see them scurrying around because they're trying to find the furthest away they can from light. The other problem is wax moths. Wax moths are horrible. They will sit on the outside of your entrance on the beehive in summer, and they will wait for an opportunity to try to get in to lay their eggs because their eggs can eat the wax. Mice and other things, of course. So stressors, if you have a drought or too much rain, those are stressors. And you have to worry about, like I said, if it rains, if you have a new hive in April, early May, and it rains for a week, they don't have enough food, so you're going to have to help them and feed them with sugar water. They cluster in the 50s. They won't fly too well until the 60s. Optimum is the 70s, and then over 100 degrees, they won't fly at all because it's just too hot. When it gets really hot, they need water. They'll take water in there, they'll evaporate it to ventilate the hive. If there's too many of them, it gets too warm, they come out of the hive, and we have pictures of them. They'll just stay on the outside of the hive, and that's called bearding. Obviously, in cold weather, they need food, and they will be clustered. They won't forage when it rains, and they won't forage when it's really windy. So I said we'd come back to mites, and here we are. This is a Brawl mite, called a Brawl Mite Destructor. Nasty little thing. That's a female mite. The male mites are much smaller. Just that's the actual size too. Come on, it's a joke. Come on, somebody smile at least. That's a microscopic electron microscope picture. So there's something called parasitic mite syndrome. If you get too many mites, destroy a hive. The cappings will look greasy. They will look perforated. It will mimic many other diseases. They'll be very spotty, and you'll have sick bees. Population will be a lot smaller. They'll be very aggressive and defensive, and they may make a whole bunch of queen cells. I had this happen the first couple of years I was doing beekeeping. I didn't know it was happening. I didn't know what the issue was. And then eventually I figured out it was all about mites. Remember, my biggest lesson was failing, and mites were a big cause of my early failures. So these are I talked about the various viruses they bring. You won't be able to tell those viruses except for deformed wing virus. You'll see these fully developed bees whose wings are all shriveled up. They're incapable of flying. They're incapable of working in the hive. All they can do is carry around this wing virus and give it to other bees. And it's a pretty sad sight because their wings are like melted. And you look at them and you go, oh, what's wrong with that? I've seen it in my hives a couple times. I always wince when I see it because I know I have to do something to help that hive along. And there's all these viruses that they transmit. So what happens is they get smaller because of the varroa mites when they're developing as pupa. So they aren't as heavy. They have a shortened lifespan of up to a week sometimes. And they have deformations. They'll have physical problems, just like the wings. And then the most recent thing they've learned about this is it affects their brains, and they have learning deficits. They've been able to prove that it affects their ability to tell where they are, to return to the hive. It's just interesting how bad these mites and their diseases are. Here's a deformed wing virus. So there's the worker bee. And you can see her wings are just horrible. This is a wing right here. And that's a wing up there. And she should have 4. There's 2 wings on each side that are interlocked. Here's a wing. You look at that little streak there. That's a wing. So you can tell she has a problem. So there's a way to handle mites. If there's anything you come away, if there's any 2 things you come away from in this course, is inspections and then how you handle mites. So the big thing now is screen bottom boards. Screen bottom boards will help when mites drop off of worker bees that are walking around. They drop down to the bottom, they drop through the screen, and they can't get back into the hive. All right, that's like 2 or 3%. Not a lot, but it helps. The key with screen bottom boards is you have to worry about the weather and temperature. If it gets too cold, it's too cold in the hive, so you want to close that off. Typically, a screen bottom board will come with a board that slips. Usually, it's not a board; it's like a cardboard slide that you can slide in that's covered with heavy wax or plastic. You can slide that in and block the bottom so the airflow doesn't go down. Resistant queen stock. Every big breeder of queens who has a genetic development in progress, and universities are trying to figure out how to get a queen developed that has more resistance to the mite viruses and more hygienic, so that the worker bees that are produced identify mites. There's something called the ankle biter bee queens from Ohio State University, and what they're trying to do is develop a queen that its offspring, its worker bees, when it identifies a mite, chews a leg off, or chews one leg off of a mite, and if a mite's missing a leg, it can't move efficiently to get water and food, and it will die. There's something that you'll hear about breaking the brood cycle in like July. I don't recommend it. What happens is you cage your queen for a couple of weeks. She doesn't lay any eggs. If there's no eggs, then eventually there's no larva or pupa, and the mites have nowhere to feed. So it breaks their cycle. I am a proponent of drone culling. And I think I'll have pictures of where the drones are, usually on the outside. You can buy special drone frames to put on the outside of your hives. And they have a bigger, it's plastic, typically green, and they have a bigger cell. And because of that, the worker bees will naturally make all drone cells. So you'll have 7,000 drone cells on each side of your brood area. And the queen, when she gets there, will just lay drone eggs. The key is you have to remember to take those out. You have to check them and say, okay, I got to take them out before they start emerging, because otherwise you're going to have 7,000 new drones, and that's really bad. The reason you want to remove those, and what you do is you freeze them, and you can freeze them for a day, and then you can put them back in the hive. The bees will clean them out, and they'll remove all the dead larvae, and they'll clean them out, and they'll for the queen to lay more drone eggs. 80% of all mites are in cat brood. So if you remember that, most of your mites, if you see 80% of mites are in cat brood. And they prefer drone brood over worker bee brood, because the drone brood takes 3 days longer to develop. And so the female mites know they can lay more eggs and have more offspring. So they will, if there's a choice between a drone cell and a worker cell that's about to be capped, they will go into the drone cell. Several research studies have proven this. What happens is then you're taking those out, or if you don't do the special frames, when you lift your frame up and you're doing an inspection, you'll see the bottom row usually has drone cells. Once they're capped, you can take your hive tool and scrape those out and then put it back in and get rid of those scraped out drone cells. That will help your mite problem significantly. A couple of years ago, I scraped it's probably 1.5 inches by, I don't know, 8 inches or so of drone comb. And I put it on a piece of cardboard I had. I brought it to the house and I put it on top of my freezer. You can open drone cells up and try to see how many mites. And you'll be surprised, when you're out inspecting, you can open the drone comb up and see if they have mites, and you'll see these little brown dots. I forgot about it. I came back the next day and there were mite tracks on this cardboard because they realized the larva was dying and it was drying out, and they were looking for a new home, and there were mite trails all over the cardboard, and eventually the mites died because they dehydrated on the cardboard and they didn't have water. But there was mites all over. I was just shocked, and that's when I realized how important drone culling was. You want a mite monitor? It's called a sugar shake, or alcohol wash, or a sticky board. Alcohol wash is the most accurate. Sugar shake is behind it. Sticky board, we'll start there. Remember, if you have a screen bottom board and you have this insert that goes in to block it, what that is called is a sticky board sometimes. And the mites will drop onto it. You can spray it with olive oil or some type of cooking oil. The mites will drop on and they will stay there. You can pull that sticky board out and count how many mites and sort of make a determination whether or not your hive has a problem. Not too accurate, but it gives you an indication of whether you have a lot of mites or not. Sugar shake and alcohol wash, you're actually figuring out how many mites per 100 bees. Much more accurate. Alcohol wash is the most accurate. I don't use it. I have 4 dogs now, but out in my yard, if I did the alcohol wash, I'd either have to walk, I don't know, 100 yards every time to throw that those dead bees, because it kills the bees, those dead bees away, so my dogs wouldn't get them, because if I threw them out in the yard, the dogs would be nosing around them for sure. So I use the sugar shake, and what that does is you dump the bees back in the hive. And we'll talk about mite treatments. Let's see. I don't know if I skipped that part by accident. See, deformed. Yeah. Okay. We'll talk about drone culling. I sort of talked about it. It's extreme drone removal. I mean, if you've seen drone comb on your porch and you do an inspection and it's sizable, it's a couple inches long. You take your hive tool and you scrape those off, or you can use the special drone frames. I forgot one time, like I said, my biggest learning lessons have been mistakes. I forgot I had them in a hive. Both drone comb frames were full and they both emerged. So I had like 14,000 extra drones. I had drones everywhere. So I knew I had a mite problem. So I had to take care of the mites. Plus, what do you do with all these drones? Because the nurse bees are trying to take care of them too. It says greater than 2 square inches. If you got any significant drone comb that you can get out with your hive tool, do it. Generally accepted, and we'll get to how you measure this, is 3 to 5 mites per 100 bees is a threshold where you have to treat, or your hive will be in trouble, will die, will be really sick and die. And there's ways to accommodate that. So I talked about sticky board a little bit. The tip on a sticky board is, you spray something. Once you pull that out, you can put a piece of saran wrap, I've seen this done, over the area, and then use a indelible pen, a Sharpie, to circle where the mites are. It's easier to count. That's just easy counting. Some rules of thumb are, if you have more than 25 mites in a day on that board, you should treat, but that's pretty subjective. We're going to talk about alcohol wash and sugar shake here. All right. You get a mason jar with number 8 hardware cloth. I have some pictures coming up, but a typical canning jar, the top cover is open in the middle, right? It's just a cover. What you do is you put number 8 hardware cloth or screen in there for the top. You're going to take bees from your brood frame and shake them into a bucket. I'll have pictures of how we do it, but one way is to use a dishpan and shake them down, and the bees will go in there. The foragers will fly up. The nurse bees will stay there. You're looking for the nurse bees. Nurse bees will stay there for a little bit. You scoop them up. You want a half a cup of bees. And a half a cup is about 400 bees. Let's say 350 to 400. You push them, you drop them into your mason jar, put the cover back on, and then you can do the sugar shake or alcohol wash. For alcohol wash, they use alcohol, they use starter fluid, they use windshield washer fluid, a whole bunch of different things. Like here's starting fluid, you spray that in, it's ether, and it kills all the bees in there. And then you shake it, and you shake on a surface, and the mites will fall off, and you can count the mites. Sugar shake is you take them and you put a couple tablespoons of powdered sugar in there. You shake it really vigorously. You set it down for a couple minutes. You shake it again. And then you find a surface that you can shake the powdered sugar out on. You spray a little moisture from a spray bottle on the powdered sugar, which dissolves it, and what's left are the mites. You always want to use the bees from brood frames to do that, because those are the bees that will have the mites on them, because the mites are looking for pupa that's about to be capped. So you collect your bee sample. The key is, if you're outside and you're doing this, and you're going to set it down, you set it down in the shade, because if you set it down in the sun, the bees will just get too hot and die. In a hot summer, you want to bring them into your house and do it in an air conditioning area because it gets really moist in there. The sugar will start clumping. Like I said, you shake it, you wait a minute, you repeat, and then you count your mites. When you get done, you can take the bee sample back out to your hive, dump it in front of the hive, and most of the bees will still be alive. They'll go back in the hive, and other bees will clean the powdered sugar off. I dump them into the top of my hive, underneath the honey. So I'll lift the honey super up and dump them into where the brood area is. They will get cleaned up. Any dead bees, the other bees will take and fly and take them away. The undertaker bees will take care of that. Let's see. We'll go over this again on Tuesday. Like I said, 3 to 5%. 10 mites on 400 bees, that's 2.5%. Accuracy of their sample size is important. So you want to be conservative and underestimate rather than overestimate. I'll show you some pictures real quick and then we'll get back together on Tuesday. And I'll go over this one more time because mites are very important, mite checks. That's my wife. This is a chicken thing that you push chickens in and you can cut their heads off. We adapted it. And we put a funnel at the other end into a mason jar. And you can see this is a brood, cap brood. It has nurse bees. The other side has larva. She shakes that in there. They go down the funnel into the mason jar. And there's my mason jar. There's the hardware cloth on top. Number 8 hardware cloth. You can see the powdered sugar in here on the bottom right. And you shake them. I shake them into this plates, these plastic throwaway plates we have. And you can see there's a mite. After you dissolve the powdered sugar, you can see there's one of the mites that you count. If you only get 1, 2, or 3 mites, you're doing really great. I've had 15, 20, and it shocked me. And I have to go out and treat that hive instantly. I shouldn't have that many. Let's see, and then we'll get to mite products. So we'll get back together on Tuesday. You guys haven't sent me any emails, so I can't send you anything.
Sorry, right when we logged on, I sent you one because I realized I forgot on Tuesday.
Okay. Yeah, what happens is I'll send you an inspection sheet and you can just use it as reference. So I'll
I
do
thought
that
I
later.
sent mine. I'll try again real quick here.
Okay. ESJ178@gmail. I went and checked my spam folders too, and I didn't see anything. So
Okay.
I checked
All
them.
right.
But anyway, send those, and I can send some material to you. And we'll
Great.
see you on Tuesday then. How's that?
All right, sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.